Welcome to Props and Hops, a podcast pursuing the best in betting and beer. I'm your host, Matt Landis, and this week's guest is Stephen Diano, also known as Fats. Fats is a gambling legend, a member of the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame's board of directors. You can find him on Twitter at real_Fats. We had the privilege of meeting at Bet Bash 2, or at least it was a privilege for me. Fats, I'm glad to be doing this one just under the gun before Bet Bash 3. Welcome to Props and Hops.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to have these chats with the community and get the information out there or answer the questions that people are interested in knowing.
And on that note of getting information out there, in the past, you have done excellent interviews with Spanky on Be Better Bettors, as well as on the Gambling with an Edge podcast. So, as always, I will look to advance rather than repeat too much of those previous conversations. And at the same time, for the Props and Hops audience, if anybody's unacquainted, I would love to start with just hearing your story of your background when it comes to all of your legendary experience in the betting space.
Well, I started out just being just a kid that liked to follow sports, and I had a neighbor of mine when I was in high school that just used to. He would bet, and I would visit him. I happened to be friends with him, and he was an older gentleman. He had his own business, but I would take care of the neighbor's dog, and it was all a friendly neighborhood. And I would be over there visiting, and I would see him. He made a few bets one time and kind of explained to me what he was doing, and I thought that was interesting. And then I tried to tell him, send him a note one day. I says, "Could you bet like $5 on this for me?" And then he's like, "No, I'm not doing that for you. You can't. You're too young. I'm not. Whatever." And then through high school, turns out a friend of mine from high school, his dad was a bookie, and he could take bets for $5 and $10. And back then, you bet less than $25, you laid 6 to 5, and then if you got $30 or higher, then you could lay 11 to 10. But you're betting 6 to win 5. You don't realize how much that can eat you up, and you're having fun and you're betting, and you win a little, lose a little. You always think you could do it. And then I got the concept of middling, I learned about that, and then tried to get an extra bookie, and tried to middle lines, and finally get my first other bookie that could have different lines. And so now my friend's father, he knows me, so he'll take a bet for $200, and I got this other guy with off lines that'll take a bet for $200, and I hit my first middle or two, and then the other guy didn't want to pay me, and I was like, oh, well, that's a problem. Didn't see that coming. So I argued with that guy, and eventually some guy worked at a deli or something. Well, I didn't care. I went over to the deli. I said, look, you owe me the money. You're going to pay me. Right there in the deli, made a scene. I eventually got paid, but I learned that lesson early. You got to be careful who you're dealing with. And anyway, as time went on, I stayed involved with the betting, and then I got this great idea to, this is after I graduated from college, and I decided, I'm going to go to Vegas. I had been to Vegas for a weekend over the 4th of July on a baseball trip, and or over the All-Star break. And I found out, they'll have the lines come out early there, and you could get differences in lines. So my goal was to go out there for basketball season and make a living middling games between betting in Vegas, where I knew I'd get paid, and betting with bookies I knew back home. And this ill-conceived plan would have been, had I followed through it, it would have been a disaster. And who knows, I could be waiting tables at McDonald's or something, or right now if I had followed through with that. But when I went out there, I happened to know somebody who was betting for somebody else, and instead of doing my own thing, I just started betting for them and took a salary. It was $0.05 a week back then, and you just go in casinos kind of as a runner. And I did that, and then the guy I was part of the group I was working for. After a couple of months, I matriculated right up to the top of the list. I was the top guy in the group, and then so I took over, and then I eventually was running that whole crew, which was basically guys from out of Philly, but we were betting for a guy out of Philly, and I was controlling the Vegas runners, which was just a couple of us, and then I just kind of built it into a career from there. It's a short version.
And I think a big step in that career is eventually crossing paths with the legendary Billy Walters, almost unanimously considered the best bettor of all time, a first ballot inductee into the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame. How did you first come across Billy, and what was it like working with him?
Well, what happened there with Billy was at the time I was running the crew, the Billy Walters trial for gambling was coming on. I believe it was 1992, and this was a big trial because they weren't being charged with bookmaking. They were being charged with betting. They were being charged with basically what we were doing with being runners and betting as an organized group, but just betting. And so it was the guy that I worked for. This was a landmark thing, because if Billy lost this case, then figured we were probably going to be out of business. So I was assigned to shut what we're doing down and be in that courthouse every day for every minute of that trial, take notes, and follow what's going on. Well, I sat in the front row every day, directly behind Billy Walters and his wife, and was there every day. I took copious notes, and then on breaks and stuff like that, I got to meet Billy, and then after the trial and they had won, then I introduced him to the guy I worked for, and they eventually worked out a deal, and we did stuff with them. And then eventually, when I moved on from my guy, I worked for Billy for a year, and then after I worked for Billy for a year, then I went on my own. And
to the extent that you can speak to this, what kind of work did you do over the course of that year when you were directly involved with Billy Walters' operation?
I just was just like another mover for him, but I was kind of higher up on the food chain, because I was getting a call directly from him as opposed to, one or two links down the chain. And I had my own group of outs that I would bet for him, and then I would get a percentage of those guys. And then I would have outs that were his outs that I would also call for him. And he had 100% of those. And I would, keep track of all that paperwork and all that. I had no involvement with any of his runners that he had in Vegas. He had another crew that was doing that and didn't involve me in that. I just was kind of, the mover that he would call me for stuff that maybe he didn't want the whole group to have or stuff like that.
And what led you from ultimately working with Billy to then also linking up at a certain point with our mutual friend Spanky?
Well, linking up with Spanky really didn't have anything to do with Billy. I was done with Billy for a while. And I had gone when I finished with Billy, when I worked for him for 1 year, and then just told Billy I was going to go on my own and not come back to work for him. And so I was on my own as basically, a startup, and I wasn't playing big. But what I did do was, one of the things I did was, all the people that I worked with, other groups, other people, other sharps and stuff like that, I tried to work with them, because the more information, the better. But so, for example, let's say I sent a guy into a casino, and there's a football game that was 8, and the general consensus line was 7. And I really only wanted to bet 2 dimes on it, but it was good for 5 dimes. Well, all my training over the years, I couldn't just let let them bet 2 dimes and let them move the line. I had to bet the 5 dimes. I couldn't just let it sit there or let it not be bet. So I
Just
would bet
almost
it
on the
for 5
principle of
dimes.
leaving that value on the table, basically.
Yeah, I couldn't just leave it out there. So what I would do was, even though I didn't want to put that much at risk, and I would bet the 5 dimes. I'd take my 2, and then I would call around the various people I know, and I'd say, "Hey, I got an extra nickel on +8 on so and so. Could you use it?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 I could use it." And call another guy. So I could give out like 6 nickels to 6 sharp guys, and they're thrilled at that. Now I got 6 guys that love me to death. They're happy to help and share their information when they have something, or if I'm stuck on something, maybe they'll help me out. So I would have just overbet when I knew it was good. I would just overbet it and give away the extra, and just kind of do that to just build contacts and rapport and stuff like that. And then I built myself up over the years and got to the point where then I was doing very successful. And the way I met Spanky was, I didn't know him direct. I knew he was out there, but I didn't know him directly. And there was a couple guys that worked for me that were moonlighting for him as well. And I happened to catch them, which I wouldn't have had a problem with if I knew they were doing it, but they didn't tell me. And the issue being that, let's say, the guy's holding 100,000 of my money and he's got 100,000 of Spanky's money, and now something happens and $100,000 gets confiscated. Well, whose 100,000 is it? Is it mine? Is it Spanky's? So if you're going to be doing something and holding that money, you have to have the disclosure between the two groups, so that at least we know that situation is out there. So what happened was, one day, it was when there was the Mirage was putting up the preseason lines for a given week, and I had my 2 guys over at the Mirage, because that was the next place that was going up. And the line comes out, and it was I think +4, and I told him, we had these beepers where you would just type in the play and it would come over alphanumerically. And I said, so I sent out +4 on the beeper, but we missed it, and I knew we missed it. And then the line moved to 3.5. So I decided, all right, let's take the 3.5. And before I could type out, or just the 3.5, the game moved from 3.5 to 3. But I sent out +3.5 anyway on the beeper, even though I knew it was gone when I sent it. Figuring when the runner called in, I was just going to break his balls and tell him he's too slow. And come on, that was there. You should have had it. The whole keeping the guys, energized. Well, anyway, at the end of when he's calling his stuff in, at the end, he turns in 3 dimes +3.5. I said, you got 3 dimes +3.5? He said, yeah. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, how'd you get that? He says, well, you send it over to Beeper and I got it. And I said, well, it's interesting. And I thought about it, and I called him back and I said, look, I got to ask you a question. And if you give me an honest answer, you're not going to get in trouble. If you lie to me, then we're going to have a problem. And he says, what's the question? I said, who did you take the +3.5 for? He says, what do you mean? I took the +3.5 for you. You said take +3.5. I took +3.5. I said, all right, tell you what, I'm going to give you another chance. And I asked him again. I says, who did you take the +3.5 for? Is your second. And he goes the same story. I says, I'm going to give you one more chance, and this is your last chance. And if you don't tell me the truth, we're going to have a problem. And he says, no. I says, all right. So he says, no, he bet it for me. And I said, all right, look at your beeper. And he says, okay. I said, read me the what the beeper says on the plate. It says, take so-and-so plus 3.5. And I said, what's the timestamp on that beeper? And it was like 3:25 or something like that. I said, okay, now pull out your ticket. What's the timestamp on your ticket? And the timestamp was like 3:22. I said, so you're telling me I sent you to play at 3:25 and you went back in time 3 minutes to bet it? And that was how I busted him. And I said, because if you could do that all the time, if you can travel back in time if you could do that consistently, I says, then I can look past this. But if not, I can't. So anyway, as it turned out, they were, moonlighting for Spanky, and he had already bet the one bet for Spanky, and he'd bet the second time for Spanky, but he decided, well, to be fair, he'd give me one bet, which if all he had to do was say that, and he didn't say that. So I cashed the guy out that night, and I let him go. And we to this day we joke about it now, and we're all friends and everything like that. But it was so that was my first experience knowing of Spanky, but I wasn't doing anything with him. And then a few months or somewhere down the line, maybe a year later, somebody said, hey, I know a guy you might want to be able to do something with. And they connected me with Spanky, and I get on the phone with him, and we talked, and said, man, maybe we work something out. And of course, I started talking to Spanky 1 month before they started wiretapping him. So
when is this roughly?
That got me dragged into that whole mess.
Is this like early mid-aughts we're talking?
What's that?
What's the time frame for this when you start working with Spanky? About a month?
This was in about, I guess that was 2012, October 2012. So I started working or talking to him that August, right before football season. And then they started in September wiretapping him or something like that. And then they came in with the raids following October, at the end of October. So
let's dig into that a bit more, if we may, because I know one part of this conversation that we'll touch on is how across much of gambling Twitter, and for reasons the audience, I think, will clearly be able to tell based on your legendary stories, you're figuratively a watchdog of sorts when it comes to gambling Twitter. But it was a literal watchdog that might have thrown you a chance at a silver lining for an otherwise pretty dark moment shortly after you started working with Spanky.
You're talking about the raid?
Yeah.
We had a bull mastiff, which had a real mean bark, but he was a sweetheart of a dog. And when the police were coming in for the raid, they banged on the door, and the dog was barking, and I was upstairs in the bedroom, and my wife went down, and they gave her time to lock the dog up because they didn't want to hurt the dog or shoot the dog. Now, I had a lot of money in tickets and, uncashed in chips and tickets that were in action for the weekend. So everything was in, tickets that were bet. And so I wanted to hide that, obviously. But I only had like a minute before they were going to come in and come upstairs. And I had to try to pick a spot because I knew they were going to search the house. And luckily enough, I picked a spot, and I hid the majority of it in a spot that by a miracle they did not find. And but I left behind, like $5,000 in cash and a couple of chips and some future tickets that were like, I think one of them was the Washington Redskins. I think that was the RG3 year, and I had the Redskins for 1,000 to win 100,000 to win the Super Bowl or something. So I mean, they looked at that ticket and they thought, oh, that's like they thought they found like $100,000, but of course Washington didn't win, so they found nothing. So anyway, that was basically, they still searched the room, but they didn't search it, I think, as heavily as they want, because they found what I left them, and saved me, because it would have been a lot of money that I would have had to pay back to different people, because at the time I had deals with 4 or 5 different people, and so other than whatever my money I had that was involved with Spanky, I had money that was other people's money too that I was responsible for. And because this didn't stem from anything they did, it was from the Spanky thing. I wasn't going to tell any of those people that, well, they raided me and they took your money, because it was through no fault of theirs. So all those other people because they still confiscated a lot of money, ended up getting a lot of money from me between accounts in the casinos and stuff like that. But all the people that I owed money to, or whose money I was holding that had nothing to do with Spanky, I made it a point to get them all paid back. Now, I paid most of them as much as I could at the time, and then over the next year or two, I got everybody squared away and paid them back, because it wasn't their fault. Where a lot of people might have just walked away from that, but I didn't think that was right to do that, because they didn't bargain for that. So
I can only imagine the pressure in a moment like that, not just the amount of money involved, the relationships involved, but also the time pressure. I mean, we're talking about, I'd imagine this is around dawn, like first thing in the morning, basically being woken up. And thanks to the need to put the dog in a safe spot, you've got, what, a minute or so? What do you recall about really coming to and making the most of that time and eventually finding a hiding spot for what you really wanted to protect?
Well, the hiding spot was really, it was like what I would think would be search warrant 101, where to look for it, and yet they didn't find it. There was a trash bag with trash, and then I kind of lifted up the trash bag. It was underneath the trash bag. And so just sitting on this. So if they looked in the trash and didn't pull the whole trash bag out of the thing, they didn't say it. I mean, I thought about putting it in the trash, and then I had this thought, I'll be in jail and my wife will take the trash out. So I didn't do that.
And then
the
what
trash
happens
bag
from
also
there?
I had some from a previous surgery, so I had some wounds that were regularly being treated. So it was kind of medical waste in that trash bag. So it was kind of like a mesh, like hamper with a biohazard trash bag in it. And so I put it underneath that biohazard trash bag. And I guess combined with the fact that it, said biohazard, they just didn't want to go near it. So I left out. The funny part was that when they got a receipt of what was taken, my wife and the rest of my family, they knew that they didn't get everything. There had to be more. So for the 3 or 4 days that, let's say, I think it was 3 days or 2.5 days, I was in jail. After, they'd searched the house and left, my wife and my stepsons ripped the house apart further, trying to figure out where I put everything. And they didn't find it either. So I found that to be kind of humorous.
So you're basically in jail for just a matter of 2 or 3 days, it sounds like. And then is one of your first moves once you get back home to just go ahead and make sure that everything is still where
Couldn't
you
wait to
hid
get
it?
home and see if it was still there, and was so happy to find that it was. And then, and then I had to go get the scores, but I didn't have any computers. I had to go out and buy computers, get the scores, so I could, get back online and then check the scores and figure out the paperwork and see what I had left. So
Over the past decade plus, I know the stigma has changed so much around betting, and I would love to hear more from you on what any actual charges were. And I'd imagine some of them were off base because we're having this conversation today and you weren't put away for too long of a time. I'm sure even 2 or 3 days probably seemed like an eternity in some ways. But what was that experience like for you? Even just a couple of days having to go through that, and then what was the ultimate resolution of this scenario that led to the raid in the first place, and getting everything cleared up from there?
When I was in jail, for the couple of days that I was in jail, my biggest concern was if I was going to get out of jail in time to swap out my kicker on my fantasy football team because my kicker was on bye that week. And I did manage to get that done. So I got out in time for that, which was important. I'll tell you something that was, and this is a shout out to a good friend of mine and another legend, a real true legend. You may have heard the name Tiger.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was they arrested us on what day was it? A Wednesday or a Thursday, I guess. But whatever it was, that the next day, Friday, was a holiday in Nevada called Nevada Day. So everything was closed on that Friday. So the first day, the deals were made where if we could post bail if we all agreed to, we could post bail in Nevada if we agreed to show up in New York and post bail in New York. And then when we posted bail in New York, we would get our Nevada bail money back. So they made bail $150,000. So my parents wired the money to the lawyer to get the $150,000 to me. But Friday was a holiday and the banks were closed. So my mother wired the $150,000 on Thursday, but there was nothing. It wasn't. They weren't getting it till Monday. I was going to be stuck there all weekend. Tiger,
starting a kicker on a bye week.
Tiger, who was in Philadelphia, got wind of this. I think I called him and talked to him. But anyway, what he did was on that Friday, he got got a check for the $150,000, stuck a guy on a plane to come to Vegas to post my bail Friday night so I could get out on Saturday. Now, I don't know how many people would do something like that for somebody. But that was just over and above, and shows what kind of a guy Tiger is. So shout out to Tiger, and thanks again for that. So I got out that weekend, and then it was a matter of going back and forth to New York a couple times to Pier and this and that and the other thing. But I really hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't have any, what do you call it? Nothing I did was, they showed me wiretaps. They showed me this. They showed me that. And everything they showed me, I talked to my lawyers and I said, well, so what's wrong with that? Why can't you do that? Why can't you do that? And my lawyers, I couldn't find an explanation for what I'd done wrong. So, and then what the prosecution wanted was, well, they want me to come in and they want me to be a witness for them, like against Spanky or something like that. They're trying to make those deals. And I said to my lawyer, I said, tell you what, tell them I'll come in, I'll sit down with them, and I'll tell them I'm not going to make a deal to become a witness, but I'll tell them whatever they want to know about Spanky. Whatever you want to know, I'll tell you. I'll answer all your questions truthfully, because I happen to know Spanky was just betting. Spanky wasn't doing any bookmaking. He was just betting on a large scale, but he was just betting. So there was nothing he was doing that was any different than really what I was doing. So there's nothing he was doing wrong. So
is that the issue? Are the charges about bookmaking, and that's where the lack of clarity was?
Yeah, what they were trying to say that, Spanky would get, like, Spanky would have betting partners that would so let's say you have 5 guys that you can bet with. So you give Spanky those 5 accounts, and then he'll bet them, and then you'll take a percentage and he'll take a percentage of that. Okay. So what they were saying was that there were some bookmakers who were actual bookmakers who gave Spanky accounts to bet with other bookmakers. And so Spanky was betting partners with those bookmakers, but only in a betting sense. He had nothing to do with anything that they were booking. He wasn't booking them. They weren't booking him. And they tried to make the stretch that was bookmaking, which it obviously wasn't. And they really never could grasp the concept. So I went into the district attorney's office, and I'm having this meeting, and they got all the prosecutors there, and they got the detectives there, and we're all sitting in a thing. And I said, look, I don't want a deal. I'll be happy to testify and tell you whatever you want to know. Go to court, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and answer any of your questions you want. And the district attorney for New York said to me, well, we can't put you on the stand unless you understand what the truth really is. In other words, they wanted me to tell what they thought the truth was, and if I was my truth was going to contradict what they wanted the truth to be, then they couldn't use me as a witness. So they didn't want to do that. And I just held out. And I refused to settle unless they had to give me a statement. And I'm the only defendant that got this. I got a letter of apology from the district attorney's office for referring to me as a bookmaker in their press release, and stating that the charges were dismissed against me, and that and at no time during their investigation was I a bookmaker or found to be doing a bookmaker. And I'm a professional gambler, and everything, as far as they could tell during their investigation, was done as a professional gambler, and I should be able to continue on my merry way. And the charge but I did have to take a plea. Now, what the plea was because I wasn't going to take a plea to something that I didn't do. So they gave me a plea for 6th-degree misdemeanor. And basically what the plea was, that I had to allocate that at some point during the course of their investigation, I committed some crime unspecified. And to my recollection, that crime was, I believe, at some point during their entire investigation, I did go over the speed limit once. So
just once, that would be pretty good for the average person.
So that was basically what I took a plea to.
Wow. And are you the only one, you said, who got a letter like that? Because was that something that you sought out just to make sure that things were as clear as possible for you to move forward coming out of this? Or were there any other circumstances that led to
it's funny.
being the only one?
I was banned from some of the casinos after that. And even though I had that letter, they didn't care. The mere fact that I was affiliated with the case, they still kind of blackballed me in a few casinos. And so it was what it was. But then there were others that, didn't bother me. And then, there were some that just, they didn't care. They have their compliance departments, and you couldn't talk to them no matter what you said. But I have that letter. If you want to get your I'll send you a copy of it so you can see what it looks like. It's really quite a gem. I think actually, if you search my Twitter feed, I believe I tweeted it out at some point in response to something a nut job was saying about my case or something like that. And I sent it out. So
yeah, I might have to check that out shortly after this on Twitter at real_fats and just look at any media that you've posted. It should be there for all to see. So that sounds like quite the compelling read, and I'm glad that you were able to clear the coast and carry on with everything, because Fats, well, that is such a legendary story. And I've got to say, you're making this easy for me. I can just ask a 10-second question and let you go, and this is so captivating. I do want to make sure to guide the conversation to the extent that it's necessary. And I feel like a natural evolution of everything that you've been through has put you in a role where you have some unparalleled authority when it comes to accountability. I think of the gambling Twitter space and being more of that figurative watchdog, as I said earlier. How do you look to tie in your experience, your perspective on things, and making sure that, to the extent that you can make a difference in a place like gambling Twitter, which can be great in some ways, can be a total cesspool in other ways, just trying to bring as much accountability as you possibly can individually?
Well, the main thing when I first of all, until I had done my original interview with Spanky on his Be Better Bettors podcast, I wasn't even on Twitter. Didn't understand it, didn't like it, didn't want anything to do with it. And then after I did the interview, I went on to Twitter to access the podcast. And then I said, all right, let's get a Twitter account. And then I got one, and, tweet here and a tweet there. And next thing you know, you become a Twitter addict. So shortly after that, there was a friend of mine, Seal, who's another legendary handicapper from the Philadelphia area, who was the handicapper that worked with us for many, many years as our crew. We were usually referred to as the Philly crew. And he had gone out to lunch with, I think, guys Piggy 4200 something, which is Neil, who was the original guy that was out there running the operation when I first went out there. And those two are buddies, and they went out to lunch, and he posted a picture from lunch, and I retweeted the picture, and I commented that that's the legendary Seal, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody said something about, oh, really? So that's what he looks like? I subscribe to his pics at Philly Godfather. And I was like, what? The Seal on Philly Godfather is not the real Seal. That is the fake Seal. And what the Philly Godfather did was, he was a guy who, back in the early days, was like a third level mover for the Philly crew. So, like, let's say Billy would call the office with a play, then, we had our main group in the office, and then they would like call two guys, and then they would call two guys. And he was somewhere down the lane chain, at best the second call, maybe third call after we got the initial call. So he knew a lot about our workings, but he was never in the inner circle, but he knew the various names and stuff like that. So our Twitter persona hit Twitter. He created this persona called the Philly Godfather, and he referred to our Philly crew as the Animals, because a lot of people had animal names: seal, rooster, tiger, etc. Now, the animals was a nickname that was used to refer to the group, but it had absolutely nothing to do. This is how dumb the Philly Godfather is. Had nothing, and I'm not going to reveal till the reason, but it had nothing to do with the fact that they all had animal nicknames. That's not the reason why they were called the animals. They were called the animals for a totally different reason. And I know that because I was the one that coined the phrase the animals. And so it had nothing to do with that, but he called them the animals and said, this is the group. And he acted like he was the main guy in that group. And then what he did was he created a persona for tiger and a persona for seal and various other people, and sells pics under their names, but has bios of the real seal and of the real tiger as if that's who they are. And he's basically trying to monetize on the history of our group. And to me, having been part of that inner circle, I find that extremely offensive, and it's inaccurate. Plus, the guy, he's just all he is just a Twitter marketer. He's not really a handicapper. The way he gets his picks, and he may do well from time to time, but the way he gets his picks by knowing various agents that have access to accounts of maybe some sharp people, and he just goes through those accounts and he picks off plays that they've made for the day and then releases them as his own plays under his various handicappers, which he's got a list of maybe 8 handicappers that he has under his wing. So that's kind of how he does it. And then he has stats, and all his stats, if you question anything he does, then he just blocks you. So anyway, I made the comment about that seal story, and immediately he started attacking me back, and he went like, I would have just left it at that, but he attacked me back, and then he got my personal cell number and was troll texting me for like every day, like just saying outrageous stuff, and he was calling my wife a prostitute, and all kinds of just totally outlandish, calling me a deadbeat, saying I owed people money, and just all kinds of ridiculous stuff. So I went on the attack on him on Twitter, and I just kept taking it to him on Twitter. Now I was blocked, but I would still tweet about him every day. I would see what he tweeted, and then I would go and comment about it on Twitter and let people know, what this guy was all about. And I would give all kinds of, I would take his stats and just mathematically destroy him. Like, he had, my favorite example was, he had a stat, and I think it was in the year 2018 or 2019. It was the football season, I think, right before the pandemic. And he had stats that $100 bettor would have won like $19,000 that year betting college and pro football off of his selections. Well, if you do the math, let's say you give him credit for picking 55%, and then you do the math and figure out what his record had to be to win $19,000 at $100 a game. It came out to about a total of 3,300 plays altogether. Well, I don't know if you've ever added up how many plays there are, how many games there are in an entire college football and pro season. But counting playoffs, there's only about 1,100 games. So in order for that stat to be correct, he would have had to release 3 selections in every single game that was played in order to be able to have a record that generated $19,000 in at $100 a game. So stuff like that. I just would mathematically torch all his stuff, everything he said. Every time he might tweet something and then tweet something contradictory, I catch it, promote it, and I did this for like 3 months for until he finally stopped. I mean, he was his text. He finally went and started. He went through the grape. He kept telling me like he liked the negative publicity because he said negative publicity is publicity and it's good for him. And I said, well, good then. I'm glad I can help you. And I kept pounding at him, and eventually he got to somebody that he went to several people to try and get them to get me to back off, and I wouldn't do it unless he, gave me an apology for the things that he said about me on Twitter, which he never did. And he also, I spoke with somebody else that he had talked to at Bet Bash last year, and he told me that he talked to the Philly Godfather about what I was doing, what I put him through. And he said he described you with one word, and the word he used was relentless. So I was kind of proud of that because it was kind of showed me I did make my mark on him, and definitely bothered him and got to him. And he doesn't bother me anymore. And, if something comes up about him, I'll tweet, but I don't actively seek to attack him now. All the information, I put it out there, and it's out there. If something new comes up and gets brought to my attention, I'll address it as I would with anything else I see out there. If somebody puts up something that's false or misleading, I'll try to attack that as well, or straighten it out or start a discussion.
Relentless seems like a good word to sum that up, because I was thinking of the term all-consuming and how this must be, from your perspective. I think it's coming from a place of having very qualified experience to do what you're trying to do in setting the record straight and help as many people as possible. And at the same time, you mentioned when you first started using Twitter, I think you mentioned the word addicted or addiction at some point early on, and being involved in this kind of stuff every single day. And on one hand, I mean, what a noble effort to fight the good fight. And on the other hand, like, where do you draw the line between trying to fight the good fight and at the same time making sure that it's not becoming too all-consuming for the rest of your life, and perhaps fueling the fire just by adding oxygen to something that at times may not deserve it?
Well, one of the other fights that I'm trying to fight, and I just do this on a, when I see a tweet basis for the most part, but I'm constantly going after American Gaming and Bill Miller and DraftKings and MGM and some of these other sites, because they advertise like, MGM, for example, they have an ad that says they have Jamie Foxx, and he's like, bet with MGM Sports, bet with a winner, win like a king. If you if you win like a commoner, that MGM will limit you to $10 bets or $20 bets. They tell you, all these places tell you, come here to win, but if you actually win, and they say, well, we don't want you to bet then. Basically, they limit you to the point where it's too much trouble to try and make a bet. And then the other thing that they do is then they have these campaigns where they say, they talk about, and this is what the American Gaming does, they talk about all the work they do to promote responsible gaming. But they don't promote responsible gaming. They actually target degenerate people with gambling problems. Because, first of all, the way they target responsible gaming, let's say, for example, on DraftKings, if you decide, if you want to exercise their responsible gaming tools, so let's say you have a gambling problem. So the way their responsible gambling tools on their website work is that you have to, A, recognize you have a problem, acknowledge you have a problem, and then in their software, go to the part where it says, where you self-limit yourself. So you log in and say, put a limit on how much you can bet. So that's their answer to responsible gaming. That's like telling an alcoholic, well, okay, well, go in a bar and sit there, but if you don't want to drink, don't drink. Just tell us you don't want to drink, or if or just giving them like little thimbles full of alcohol or something like that. And that's not how it works. I mean, gambling, if you have a gambling problem, you got to just stop gambling. You can't just gamble a little, just like alcohol. So, but then they take the people that are responsible in their gaming and who, take the time to handicap and hunt for the best odds and try to win. And those people they target and they say, well, we don't want your business. So if they don't want the business of the people that can win, then all their marketing is targeted for the people who either can't win or can't help themselves. So it's ridiculous, and it's not, it's a tough fight. The only way to truly win that fight is you need more people to get on board. Now, I always tweet about it when I can, but the only way to really, for it to do better is you need people to keep retweeting it and retweeting it and retweeting it and get the views out there. I mean, I've had tweets where, attacks where I've gotten up as high as over 50,000 views, but a lot of times, maybe I only get 1,000 to 5 or 10,000. So the more retweets you can get, obviously, the more success you'll have. I mean, and another place to attack too, I try to attack the celebrity endorsers. On their, every time I see an endorsement with a celebrity endorser, I tweet at them that they're being used and they're being told they're advertising one thing, but then the company's making a fool of them and doing something else. So I try to always attack those celebrity endorsers whenever I see a tweet from them. But that's the way I try to attack that. I think it's a hypocrisy.
I think there's a lot of validity to concerns around hypocrisy here. And at the same time, when I hear you use the word attack, I feel like it maybe push back on me if this is semantics. But even if you are 100% right, if somebody who's in the wrong feels like they're being attacked, that often might not be the most productive path to a positive outcome. So how do you try to position things in a way that might ultimately affect the change that you're, I think, truly pushing for from a place of good intentions?
Well, the only real way to get change is you need, and this is something that I really don't know how to do, you need access to the people with a voice. Like, you need to put together either some type of a coalition, or you need to get people who, can maybe get you access to somebody in the, maybe in Congress or something like that, where maybe we could get this up on a higher scale. I mean, one of the things I thought about doing, but I haven't done it because it's not technically not right. It's like, I thought about calling Gamblers Anonymous, the Gamblers Anonymous helpline, and tell them I have a gambling problem. When they say, "What's your gambling problem?" I said, "Well, I'm a winning gambler, but they won't let me bet." But I just kind of felt like, that service is not really there for that problem. But it's something I've always wanted to do, but I didn't want to, do that, and then maybe some poor guy's, maybe doesn't gets put on hold and doesn't take the call or something. So I didn't do
Right.
it, but it's something I really want to do, but I haven't done that.
Well, when you talk about an impactful way to affect change and teaming up with others and having some sort of coalition, I wonder if there's a bit of a connection here to a possible impact that could ultimately come from something like the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame. I'd love to dive into this with you because it is, the cream of the crop, about as illustrious of a group as there could be when it comes to the selection committee, and especially that reputation is only going to grow with future inductees being announced. So Fats, as part of the board of directors, I believe you sit on within the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame. How would you describe that experience so far?
How would I describe what?
Your experience thus far with the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame.
Oh, well, first of all, kudos to Spanky for the vision to get it started. He had discussed it with me for a while, and the thought about it, and then he finally said he was going to do it, and he did it. And I'm honored that he chose me, to consider enough of me to offer me a spot on the board. And I know a good portion of the other people on the board I think are also good, people for this commission. And then as we induct members, those members can become board members, so the board will grow. And I think it's the whole concept of it is great. I mean, this will be the inaugural year. The inaugural banquet will be at Bet Bash this year. And the star-studded cast as far as the inductees for the first round. So certainly looking forward to it, and honored to be a part of it.
And speaking of a star-studded cast, there are some names. I know Billy Walters and Roxy Roxborough were among the first couple of names to be announced, and I think that's to the surprise of basically nobody. As more names are starting to trickle out, it seems like there are some very deserving candidates, but maybe without as much household recognition, if you will, when it comes to betting circles. So how would you describe your own process vetting different nominees and really trying to uncover the virtues of doing your due diligence as a voter on this committee?
Well, each nominee that we're about to vote on, when the vote comes out, the ballot comes out, there's attachments and links to various articles about the person, videos possibly. So there's a whole bunch of information. Plus, even before that, we have a chat room for all the board members where we can discuss nominees and stuff like that. So I look at all the information that's provided about the various people, and then from that, I make a decision. I mean, at this point, being as how we're starting from scratch, and there's probably, this is not going to just be like 5 people for the rest of the, existence of the hall. It's going to grow like any Hall of Fame. So the the number of people that can be nominated, there's so many, but the first class, all the early people are likely to have an easier time getting in than people down the line further, because we're starting from scratch and we're saying, all right, well, who's your top 5 all time to come up with this list. So I think we did a pretty good job of the group that we got. I think it's they're certainly all worthy and all deserving, and it's should be a fun event.
I'm wondering if you could share an example of somebody who, although we're talking best of the best here, starting from scratch, as you've said, somebody who's already been announced as being in, and perhaps the first time you came across their name, maybe it didn't resonate, but as you did some of your homework, you actually became convinced that this was somebody who was deserving of that first ballot induction. Any examples like that perhaps come to mind?
There's one in particular, is a guy named Charles McNeil, who was one of the we have 5 inductees that are still alive, and then we have 5 inductees that are no longer alive. And McNeil, all the talk about him when he came up, and he was known in a lot of circles and as a successful gambler. And back in the day, apparently, when sports betting first started, instead of the point spread, it was all money line. So everything was always a money line. And he's credited with inventing the point spread. Now, when I heard the initial nomination, heard his name, and I said, "Who's that guy?" Because I never heard of him. And somebody said, "Well, he invented the point spread." I said, "He invented the point spread." I mean, that was getting invented no matter what happened. I mean, that's not. You didn't have to be a rocket. I guarantee he wasn't the first person that said, "I'll spot you 2 points" in the history of the world. So I'm not, I wasn't sold on he invented the point spread. But after further research, more so than he invented the point spread, but he was the one that put the point spread on the map and got books to start using it more. And that's why I guess he's given credit. But then down the road, he created the teaser. Now that's something that wasn't necessarily inevitable to be created, like the point spread. So given that he put the point spread on the map, but that he created teasers, which is still a popular bet to this day. All right, I could see definitely he deserved. Plus, in his own right, as well as that, he was also the word was also a very successful gambler on top of that too. So he kind of checked that box also.
I love that example, and that's one more Sports Gambling Hall of Fame question for you. I feel like this one, if I asked everybody on the committee, I'd get a different answer from each person. But to you, when you're making your voting decisions, what comes to mind when I ask you how you define what constitutes a Sports Gambling Hall of Famer?
Well, for me, it's got to be somebody that, I mean, obviously, they don't have to be known. Well, they have to be known by someone. I mean, there has to be some record or knowledge of. Just because I never heard of them doesn't mean that they're unheard of. So it's got to be somebody that has a track record that's verifiable through people who have, been in the business and who are aware. It's got to be somebody who has shown honorability, not somebody that might have stiffed people along the way or not paid people, or to somebody who's always honorable, obviously honest, as far as that goes, and also what kind of contributions they made. Were they a handicapper? Were they just good at getting down? Like, for example, just take me as a player. I'm not. I mean, can I do handicapping? Do I know how to do handicapping? Have I done handicapping? Yes. Is that my strong suit? Is that how I make money? I do not make money from handicapping. I don't profess to make money from handicapping. Most of the money I make is from finding value in the odds, and one of my other skills is assisting others who are handicappers, because one thing we know about handicappers is that handicappers are generally not good better. If you take a handicapper and a bettor and you give them both the same information, the bettor is more likely to win than the handicapper, because handicappers don't necessarily, they like a game and they bet it, whereas the bettor will take the information, like the game, but then work the numbers and try and get the best edge or find the best way to bet something. So for me, I bring that to the table for various players. And so I get the benefit of their information and I help them get down better than they could get for themselves. And then I can benefit from that for myself as well. So, so there's various skills that people have. Obviously the real top of the line handicappers for sure that have track records that, and I joke, I have this running joke about Billy Walters as far as his track record for gambling. And I said on Billy, he was known for college football and college basketball. And I told everybody, I tracked his record on college basketball and college football for an entire season. And you know what his winning percentage was?
Man, I would guess
100%. Now, how do I know Billy won 100%? Because every Sunday when the games were over, all the games where the line moved, everybody said, well, that was a Billy game. And every game where all the lines moved and lost, everybody said they were Billy setups. So therefore, Billy had to be 100% every Saturday.
I was throwing out a serious answer for a moment there with something in the mid to high 50s, but yeah, as the narrative goes, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that the winning percentage of some of the most successful people in this realm is in reality probably not quite as astronomical as the casual observer might guess.
No, if you can get to 55%, you're doing phenomenal. Have I seen bettor? Yeah, as a matter of fact, not this basketball season, but the college basketball season before this, the year before, was the best college basketball season I've seen in my entire 30 plus years of doing this. And I'm telling you, I don't chart out what the winning percentage was, but from the source I was getting the games from, they were saying it was in the high 60s, maybe, but it had to be at least close to 60%, because I'm telling you, it was just off the charts ridiculous. Like, there was hardly a day we ever lost for an entire season. This year wasn't quite the same. It started out good, and then kind of after January, it just kind of chopped the rest of the way. But yeah, but if you can just do 55%, if you can do 53 or 54%, you're fine. But anybody can hit 55%, you're in an elite status, I would say.
And as we're talking percentages, I've got to follow up and ask you about your comment about not tracking win percentages necessarily on your own end, because I feel like a lot of people listening to this conversation might have perked up when they heard that. I feel like a lot of the most successful bettors who are really savvy and have a lot of excellent experience in this realm would say that bet tracking is one of the foundational components to really making this a sustainable endeavor. So can you clarify what you meant, if I heard correctly, when you said you don't track bet percentages, and then how you do go about tracking your bets over time?
Well, I don't track bets for a couple of reasons. Number one is I'm not always going to bet the same. I don't always bet the same amount on every game. So if you're not betting every game, your winning percentage isn't relevant. You'd have to break, let's say I was betting, I would either bet anywhere from 1 to 5 times. Well, if you want to track your winning percentage accurately, you have to track your winning percentage when you bet 1,000, your winning percentage at 2,000, at 3,000, at 4,000 and 5,000. So I don't necessarily track. I track myself by the value I get. So in other words, if I find a number that's worth betting, it's always worth betting for the limit. Now, obviously, sometimes that limit is above and beyond what, Circa's getting a little out of hand now. For example, Circa says they'll take 100,000 on a game. And if Circa's got what I consider to be a great number and it's good for 100,000, well, all right, I'm pumping the brakes a little bit. So, but in general, if you've got a place that takes anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 in a market where you can get down, and they've got a solid off number, you bet it for the limit, and then you either you give some away to a friend, and maybe get paid back later with some barter down the road, making a friend or something like that. Or, worst case, you could even buy some back, which I always think you're better off just giving some away and banking the future equity as opposed to trying to middle and just a lot of times give money away.
I feel like this conversation, I would love to dig into this topic maybe a bit more in person when we're at Bet Bash 3. Fats, I want to make sure to also get your take on the upcoming Bet Bash descending on Vegas, August 8th through 11th. The Sports Gambling Hall of Fame we've touched on in this conversation will be the capstone event of the conference. And I know you attended Bet Bash 2. What would you say were some of your top takeaways from that event and how that's informing what you're most anticipating this time around?
Well, I mean, the highlight of the event was getting a guy who crashed Bet Bash thrown out. But those who follow me know who that guy is, and I'm not going to say anything more about him. But that was the highlight, getting him thrown out. I don't think he's going to even dare show up this year. If he does, he'll probably be escorted off the property quite quickly. But as far as the event itself, it was the people that you met and the contacts that you can make are just phenomenal. I mean, out of Bet Bash, I didn't make a lot of contacts. I met a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, but I ended up doing stuff with just a few people that I met there. And, you'll meet a few more people, but, when you meet one or two people, that leads you to meet other people. And, something very important. This is one of the best pieces of advice I can give to anybody who's going to try to bet sports for a living. It's not about what you know, and it's not about who you know. It's about who you know knows.
Are there any examples you can think of in which you've been able to apply that notion in your own career? Or if nothing comes to mind there, how somebody who's hearing this conversation, maybe an up and coming recreational bettor, could try to wrap their heads around a concrete application of that advice?
I think I didn't hear that completely, but I think you're asking me, would I try to cultivate a handicapper or something like that? Was that basically
basically your own take on how to more concretely implement that, I think, very wise quote that you just shared with us. What does that look like in action to you?
Well, I mean, obviously you gotta meet the people that are successful are the people you want to know, and the successful people, you want to know what they know. So it's not necessarily who you can know. A lot of people, and a lot of people who hate, but you want to know, but who you know knows is really the important thing. So it's all about the person you know and what they know. I mean, obviously, but I mean, there's other reasons to be friends. It's not just that, I'm not saying that's the only reason to to know somebody. But it's just kind of really what it always boils down to. It's what, the more people that know something, the more lucrative it can be down the road for, various things. And then, things spin in. Like I give you an example. I met a guy there who wanted to do something with a project. He was trying to take advantage of these sign up bonuses and stuff like that. And he approached me about it, and he's kind of interested in it. And I said, well, I exchanged information. Give me a call. I said, I'm not really into all those bonuses and stuff like that, but I'll see what you have. And he eventually contacted me later, and then I got into a situation where, we talked. We never really did anything with that, but then he contacted me again about maybe getting out of that and helping get down or something like that. And I said, well, if you can get, a couple outs where you can bet, then, or places that, that I can't bet that you can bet, then obviously that would be helpful. And we did that for a little bit, and that worked out, and that was fine. And then through him, I met another guy who I got a really good out from. And so you never know how it's going to mature. Meeting one person can matriculate into something else.
I appreciate that context, because when you shared the advice of ultimately it's about who knows, I understood conceptually what you were saying, but I was trying to wrap my head around personally how I might apply it. And as you gave more context there, it reminded me of people who I've been fortunate to cross paths with. I think of handicappers like Cleve TA or Fabian Summer, who goes by Suma in gambling Twitter circles. Guys who are so strong when it comes to a lot of qualitative components around NFL matchups, and a lot of their insight has fueled some of my best success over the years betting point spreads. And aside from betting NFL sides, when I think of props, I mean, I naturally am inclined to look at props. It's part of the name of this show. I can think of nobody better than Hitman in that space. So knowing the right people and really what their specific areas of expertise are can really go a long way. I mean, I think of somebody like a Las Vegas Chris, who I've been fortunate to get to know pretty well over the last few years. And he is so sharp. I mean, his contest record speaks for itself, but he thinks outside the box in ways that really challenge me. So just knowing different skill sets of different people, to your point, kind of using the approach of curating the best of what everybody brings to the table can really help any individual get to a better place without having to reinvent the wheel themselves each step of the way.
Well, obviously when you're, knowing what other people know, you're trying to learn. So part of what you want to take, if you can, what they know, if you can take some of that as a skill to add to your repertoire to help you on your own with something, that's certainly a plus. And the other way to know what other people know is you have to make something in your skill set valuable to them, so that they'll want to share that information with you. And it's all about building relationships. And it's something I used to call it the revolving door theory of gambling. And a lot of times people, they get together and then they have disagreements, and they part ways or whatever. And I always used to say, if you part ways, always part amicably, because somewhere down the line, something's going to come up where your skill sets are going to come back together, and you might be able to do something to help each other. And I always refer to that as the revolving door theory of gambling, because just because you're not getting along and not going to do something with somebody, somewhere down the road, an opportunity will come up, and next thing you know, you're back with them.
And I would like to underscore
one of the
that
guys that I'm partners with right now, I just over the last summer, I was home visiting my mother, and she had some found some photographs. I don't know how she ended up with them because they were from in Vegas, but I don't know how they ended up with her. But I think they were sent to her by my ex-wife or something. I think that's how that worked. But anyway, I looked at the photographs and there was a picture of me and my current partner having a beer together or having drinks together like 25 to 30 years ago. And, at that point, there was no foreseeable we would be together today. And at the time, we did some business together, and then we didn't do anything for a while. And then something came up and I'd get back in touch with him. And we'd do something for a stretch and that worked out. And then we'd maybe go our ways and get back in. And I probably gone back to him maybe three, 4 or 5 times over time. And now we're back together again. So, because there times come up where our skill sets just coincide, and it's a good arrangement for both of us.
I love that example, and I'd like to underscore that is an approach that can apply to just about any walk of life. And in fact, going beyond the sports betting realm, something that might be a bit of a props and hops exclusive, if I'm not mistaken. You have a bit of a poker background as well that hasn't come to light too much in the past. And based on your overarching number one piece of advice in sports betting, I wonder how that's played into any aspects in your poker background, or just how you would kind of contextualize how what you did in poker ultimately played, some sort of role in building you into the bettor that you've become as well.
Poker. The funny thing about poker was I had gotten involved in a project with my brother where we had written a program for a sports book. Basically the program that the sports book uses to input their bets and do their figures and stuff like that. And I had gotten involved in a project to do that, and we wrote the program and we were releasing it out to various books. And then we were approached with, well, could you write one to play poker online? And my brother and I both looked at each other and said, well, that's stupid. Who would do that? And so anyway, maybe a year or two later, the online poker thing was kicking off. And I still was like, why would anybody want to do that? And then I started playing online poker, and not only was it somewhat addictive, but after doing it, you realize, well, that'd be a lot of work to be coordinating with all these people. There were so many people to actually cheat. If you're in a tournament, not in cash games, it's got to be pretty legit. You're not going to be. I mean, in a cash game, I guess you always have to be careful online, but they have software to determine how many times to look for that certain people are in the same game all the time and stuff like that. So anyway, so I got into the tournament aspect online, and I built up they had a rating system. Like if you cashed in the tournaments, you could go to a certain level. And they had a contest that if you were a certain month, if you were in the top four people for the month would get a trip to the Bahamas for those Poker Stars for their very first tournament down in at the Atlantis, wherever that is. I forget which. Was that Jamaica? I'm not sure, but wherever the Atlantis hotel is in the Poker Stars tournament. So anyway, I finished in the top 4. I set my sights on that. I won that tournament. I go down there, and when you're down there, all the people down there were a lot of the top Poker Star players that you kind of knew from online, so you got to actually meet the personalities. And the lobby had the Wi-Fi, so they would all be sitting in the lobby playing, but they were all like playing with each other, but sitting in their computers on the lobby. But I got to meet a lot of them, and there was one in particular who was a regular, who's the top of the leaderboard every month, and he was from Holland, and so I became friends with him, and I said, you should come to Vegas, and you should probably and just play in Vegas, and you could do well with tournaments and stuff like that. So he took my advice, but I mean, there was some kind of miscommunication along the way, because I know somewhere along the line, I think he thought I was going to finance him or something like that, which that wasn't really in my plan. So he came in, but I still believed him. So I said, look, I'm not going to finance you, but I'll lend you some money, because he didn't come with a lot of money. I said, I'll spot you some money. I said, so you'll owe me, whatever you play, but I'll put up a third at my own risk and have a third of you, and you have 2/3, and you're responsible for, paying me back. And so we did that. In the first series of tournaments, there was it was the Bellagio 5-diamond series, and he wins 2 tournaments. He cashes for like $1 million that week. So I make a nice score, a couple hundred. So now I'm going to stick with it. I start traveling around with him, going to the tournaments, and taking my same percentage, and then I started playing more myself, and I was doing okay in some of the tournaments as well. And there was one we were in, I think San Jose, and I think I made the final table, and he made the final 2 tables or something like that. And so we were doing well. Everything was going good. We get to the World Series of Poker the next year, and I cash a 7-card studs tournament. Then there was a Raz tournament. I finished in 3rd, and the stud tournament, I made the final table also. I had made the final table. So I started doing well myself. But the reason I was doing well was because I finally, after I stopped playing No Limit Hold'em, and I switched to just the stud and the Raz and the limit Hold'em, just the horse rotation of games. And so I did well. And then eventually his ego swelled a little, and he liked being hobnobbing with the other TV celebrity poker guys, and his ego got the best of him. And so we eventually split off, and I had my money. I'm happy. Go do what you want to do. And I just stayed with what I was doing, and that was my short-lived poker career. But I mean, short-lived in that I slowed down on the World Series events, and I found a lot of the side events that were being offered in the other casinos, even though their rates were a little higher. There was, you could find almost a mixed tournament, either stud or horse or something, almost every day. So I was playing those, which were lower buy-ins with higher rates, but the fields were so bad it was worth it. So I was doing that for a while, and then of course eventually I moved I moved from Vegas, so I'm in Michigan now. So not much poker anymore.
Fair enough. And Fats, as I gather, there's also not a ton of beer in your day-to-day life. I would be remiss not to weave in the hops as a pillar of this podcast. My understanding, you're not so much of a beer guy, but you do have a fairly clear philosophy when it comes to drinking.
Yeah, I'm not I don't drink soda because I don't like the carbonation. So that always ruled beer out for me over the years. But my philosophy, being a heavy guy, has always been, if you're going to drink, you might as well get drunk. And if you're not going to get drunk, then you're just consuming extra calories, which clearly I don't need. So I would always just, if it was going to be a drinking night, it was going to be a drinking night. And my go-to drink was a Black Russian, which was it's just vodka and Kahlua, so it's pure alcohol, and that's what I would usually go with on a designated drinking night.
That sounds like quite the heavy hitter. And if I may, I guess my own personal preferences would counter that. I do really enjoy the experience and the flavor of a good craft beer, and sometimes trying to find a way to maybe take off the edge without going too far. So I try to keep a balance of enjoying all good things in moderation to the extent that I can. And that said, I am completely aligned on everybody being entitled to their own approach. And I say there's a time and place for every drink, and that's got to include something like the Black Russian as well.
Well, if I believed in moderation, my Twitter handle would be real tiny.
You might be more in line with my frequency of tweeting, which is probably going to increase a decent bit when we get around to the NFL season, but definitely has been in off-season mode. That's one thing that is in full effect year-round. A way for me to weave in another pillar of this show, the Malinsky Minute, as a nod to the late, great sports betting legend, David Malinsky. I was very fortunate to get to know and even do some work with him over the final few years of his life. And one thing that blew me away about Dave, where I see a bit of a parallel connecting with you, Dave was so engaged, even in the comments section of his point blank column that he would write over the years. And he had such a willingness to share advice with anyone, just about any time. And to that end, my understanding is that your Twitter DMs are open to anybody. People can reach out at real_Fats and pretty much get a response anytime they want some pointers in the right direction. So, Fats, what would you say drives you to share advice with basically anybody who asks?
Well, I mean, I haven't had as much lately, but there was a stretch there where people would just DM me out of the blue, and they would start asking me questions, and I would do the best I could to, I would ask them a couple follow-up questions, get an idea of, what size player they are, what their goals are, what they're doing, what's their day job. And my first advice to most is don't quit your day job. And but I would try to steer them in the right direction and give them the best advice I could give them. And then I tell them, I said, and if you have any more questions, always feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to respond. And I've never blocked anybody on Twitter, and I've never not responded to a DM I've been sent. Where somebody asked me a question and wanted to know something or a piece of advice, and I'm always happy to do it. I mean, sometimes I could be in the middle of something and it might take a day for me to get back to somebody, but in general, I'll get back to them, and I'll, do the best I can to help them. Now, there are some that, I've tried to explain that there isn't much I can do for them. But I try to, I tell them, I'm honest with them. I tell them, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I think your positives and your negatives are. And this is what you have to do. And I give them the best evaluation I can for whatever question they're trying to ask me.
I really appreciate that approach, Fats. And I know we have not even started to scrape the surface when it comes to the NFL. I'm thinking, if it's all right with you, I would love to welcome you back on for a part 2 follow-up conversation, maybe digging into a lot of your expertise when it comes to the NFL, specifically some thoughts you've shared around key numbers and teasers that I think, we talked about offline that would be of a lot of value to this audience. So if it's cool, we can wrap this up shortly, but I would certainly love to bring you back on once we're closer to the NFL season kicking off, even probably before the preseason really gets going, so that when NFL betting is really top of mind, we can really hit that hard in a follow-up. Does that sound okay?
It would be my pleasure.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to follow up with you and get that on the books. For now, before we wrap up this conversation, I want to be sure to plug your work. Once again, anybody listening can find Fats on Twitter at real_Fats. And if you want to meet him in person, show up at Bet Bash 3 in Las Vegas, taking place August 8th to 11th. Fats, I want to thank you for your time and insight today, and I look forward to doing this again with a deep dive, laser focus on the NFL, probably sometime in early August, maybe even before we reconvene at Bet Bash 3.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to do it, and always happy to jump on in. Just let me know.
All right, sounds good. We will definitely be doing this again. For now, I also want to thank everybody for watching and listening to this conversation, and I'll catch you next week right back here on Props and Hops.